The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the distant howling of a stray dog scavenging for food. The brothel at the edge of town was alive with muffled voices, drunken laughter, and the faint sound of high heels clicking against cracked cement floors. The air smelled of stale alcohol, sweat, and cheap perfume. In one of the tiny back rooms, a woman lay on a tattered mattress, her body trembling, her breath ragged. Blood stained the worn-out bedsheets beneath her, and pain ripped through her fragile frame. The child had come too early, too fast. No midwife, no doctor, just a dimly lit room and a madam who wanted her back on the streets before dawn. Sawa was barely 20, but life had aged her beyond her years. She had no family, no home, no dreams. The streets had raised her, hardened her, broken her. And now, staring at the tiny, wrinkled creature in her arms, she felt nothing. No warmth, no joy, no motherly instinct. Only fear. I can't do this. I can't be a mother. The baby whimpered weakly. He was small, fragile, his fingers barely the size of a cigarette butt. His eyes were squeezed shut as if he, too, understood the cruelty of the world he had just entered. Sawa sat up slowly, wincing from the pain between her legs. The madam had warned her, if you keep that thing, you're out. No baby cries in this business. There was no time for second thoughts. She wrapped the baby in an old scarf, her hands trembling. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she pushed the door open and slipped into the night. The streets were deserted. The city, once alive with noise and chaos, had settled into uneasy silence. Sawa walked with hurried steps, her eyes darting left and right. She had no plan, only a desperate need to disappear. She reached an abandoned roadside, where the dim glow of a broken street lamp flickered on and off. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps. She looked down at the baby, her lips pressed into a thin line. He deserves better than this. Her fingers hesitated as she placed him gently on the ground, his tiny body barely a shadow against the cold cement. The moment she let go, a sharp pain stabbed through her chest, but she shook it off. She had survived without love. So would he. Then she turned and ran. The baby's cries rose into the air, swallowed by the vast emptiness of the night. Sawa didn't look back. She didn't want to see. She disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind the life she had carried for 9 months, leaving behind the son she would never know. And so, under the flickering street lamp, on the cold, merciless road, a destiny was set into motion. Baba Tafa stirred in his small, mud-brick house, his thin blanket barely shielding him from the cold. The night was unusually silent, the kind that carried an unsettling weight in the air. At 62, his ears had grown attuned to the rhythms of the village. He could recognize the wind before it arrived, tell the difference between a goat's bleat and a baby's cry. But this sound, this was different. A weak, broken wail drifted through the air, almost blending with the rustling of dry leaves outside. Baba Tafa sat up, his joints cracking as he moved. He listened again. A baby. His brows knitted together. No one in this part of town had a newborn. The only pregnant woman he knew had given birth 2 weeks ago, and her house was on the other side of the village. The wailing continued, piercing the night like a desperate plea for help. His heart pounded. Grabbing a rusty lantern, he pulled on his threadbare slippers and stepped outside, shivering as the cold breeze bit into his skin. His feet carried him toward the sound, his lantern swaying with each step. At first, he thought it was an abandoned kitten, but as he turned the corner near the old, broken street lamp, his breath caught in his throat. There, lying helplessly on the ground, was a tiny bundle wrapped in an old, thin scarf. The baby's fists were clenched, his face wrinkled in distress as his cries grew weaker. He was so small, so fragile, his skin already cold from the night air. Baba Tafa's hands trembled as he bent down. He had seen many things in his long, weary life, famine, death, even war, but nothing had ever struck him as deeply as this moment. Someone had left this child to die. Ah, Olua, what kind of wickedness is this? He whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Carefully, he picked up the baby, cradling him in his arms. The tiny thing barely weighed anything, and for a moment, Baba Tafa wondered if he would even survive the night. He held the lantern close, examining the child's face. A boy. His tiny mouth opened and closed as he whimpered, searching for warmth, for comfort, for a mother who was no longer there. Baba Tafa swallowed the lump in his throat. He should take the baby to the elders, to the chief, to someone who could decide what to do. But deep down, he already knew what they would say. Leave him. If the gods willed his survival, his mother would not have abandoned him. He couldn't do it. Turning on his heel, he walked back toward his house, his steps firm with purpose. He was old, poor, and had nothing to offer but his own weary heart. But he would not let this child die in the cold. Not while he was still breathing. As he entered his small hut, he stoked the dying fire and wrapped the baby in his own blanket. The child nestled closer to him, his tiny fingers grasping onto Baba Tafa's worn-out tunic as if sensing the first bit of safety he had ever known. For the first time in years, Baba Tafa smiled. "From today, you are mine," he whispered, stroking the boy's tiny head. "And your name shall be Oladimeji, because even in my poverty, my wealth has doubled." Outside, the wind howled. But inside that small, humble hut, fate had been rewritten. Baba Tafa barely slept that night. Each time he dozed off, the baby stirred, letting out soft whimpers that tugged at his heart. He had forgotten what it felt like to have someone else in his home. His wife had died 10 years ago, and their only child had been taken by the fever shortly after. Since then, his house had known only silence. But now, that silence had been broken by the fragile breath of a child who was not his, yet somehow felt like his own. As dawn broke, the rooster's crow echoed through the village, and Baba Tafa sat up with a groan. He glanced down at the sleeping baby, still curled against his chest. His tiny fingers twitched, his little lips parting slightly as he breathed. A pang of fear hit Baba Tafa. What if he doesn't survive? The baby was weak, his cries too soft for a newborn. He needed food, warmth, care, things Baba Tafa could barely provide for himself. "Olua, help me," he murmured, stroking the baby's soft head. He gently shifted the child, placing him on a folded cloth near the fire before standing up. His knees creaked as he reached for his old wooden staff. There was no time to waste. He had to find help. The village was already awake, women setting out their wares, children running barefoot on the dusty paths, men gathering at the palm wine joint to discuss the day's work. Baba Tafa walked past them, ignoring the curious glances. An old man carrying a bundle in his arms was not a common sight. He stopped in front of the compound of Memaref, the village midwife. Her hut was small but well kept, the scent of herbs wafting through the air. Before he could knock, the door swung open, revealing a stout woman with sharp eyes and a firm mouth. "Baba Tafa, what brings you here this early?" Wordlessly, he unwrapped the cloth, revealing the baby. Mama F's eyes widened. "Whose child is this?" she asked, her voice low. "I found him. Abandoned, near the roadside," Baba Tafa said. "He was left to die." Mama F sucked in a sharp breath, then reached for the baby with careful hands. She examined him, checking his fingers, his toes, his mouth. "He is weak, hungry. He needs a mother's milk." Baba Tafa's heart sank. Where would he find a nursing mother willing to feed a nameless child? But Mama F was already thinking. "A joke gave birth 2 days ago," she said. "She may help." Baba Tafa nodded gratefully. "One more thing," Mama F said, looking at him closely. "What will you do with him?" Baba Tafa hesitated. He had not thought beyond keeping the child alive. Could he really take care of him? What if the child grew sick? What if he couldn't afford to feed him? But then he looked down at the baby, at the way his tiny fingers clung to the cloth, as if holding on to life itself. "I will raise him," Baba Tafa said firmly. Mama F studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Then he must have a name." Baba Tafa turned his gaze toward the baby, his mind searching for the right name. "Oladimeji," he said at last, his voice filled with quiet strength. "Because even in my poverty, my wealth has doubled." Mama F's face softened. A good name, she said. She reached into her hut and handed Baba Tafa a small bottle of herbal tonic. Give him this for strength. And take him to a joke quickly. He must feed soon. Baba Tafa nodded, wrapping Olodimiji back in the cloth. As he walked away, he felt something stir inside him. Something he had not felt in a long, long time. Hope. Baba Tafa walked as fast as his aging legs would allow, his heart heavy with both hope and fear. Olodimiji had barely made a sound since leaving Mama F's hut, his tiny body still wrapped tightly in the old cloth. The boy needed food, warmth, and love, but love alone could not keep a baby alive. Ajoke's hut was near the village square, where women gathered every morning to fetch water and trade goods. As Baba Tafa approached, a few women turned to stare, their eyes widening when they saw the bundle in his arms. Whispers rose like dry leaves caught in the wind. What is Baba Tafa doing with a baby? Where did the child come from? He ignored them and knocked on Ajoke's wooden door. A young woman, barely in her 20s, opened the door with tired eyes. Her hair was wrapped in a faded scarf, and her wrapper was loosely tied around her waist. She held her newborn son to her chest, gently rocking him. Baba Tafa, she asked, confused. Without a word, he unwrapped Olodimiji just enough for her to see the frail, shivering baby. Ajoke's breath caught. He was abandoned, Baba Tafa said. He is starving. Ajoke glanced at her own baby, then back at Olodimiji. She did not ask questions. She simply stepped aside and motioned for Baba Tafa to enter. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of fresh herbs. Ajoke sat on a mat and adjusted her baby before carefully reaching for Olodimiji. The moment her skin touched his, he let out a weak cry, a sound so feeble that it nearly broke Baba Tafa's heart. He is very weak, Ajoke murmured, shifting to position him properly. But he will fight. Baba Tafa watched in silence as she placed Olodimiji to her breast. At first, he was too feeble to latch on. He whimpered, his tiny lips barely moving. But Ajoke was patient. She rubbed his back gently, whispered soft words, and tried again. Minutes passed, and then, finally, Olodimiji latched. His tiny body shuddered with effort, but he drank. Baba Tafa exhaled deeply, his shoulders sagging with relief. Thank you, Ajoke. May the gods bless you. She shook her head. He is a child. No child deserves to suffer. Baba Tafa watched the two infants side by side. Ajoke's son, round and full of life, and Olodimiji, small and frail, clinging desperately to his second chance. He realized something then. This was just the beginning of the battle. For the next few days, Baba Tafa did everything he could to care for Olodimiji. Mama F provided herbs to strengthen him. Ajoke continued feeding him whenever she nursed her own child. But then, on the 7th night, the fever came. It started with a soft whimpering. At first, Baba Tafa thought Olodimiji was just restless. But when he touched the baby's forehead, panic gripped him. His skin was burning hot. No, 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 Baba Tafa muttered. He grabbed the herbal tonic Mama F had given him and tried to get Olodimiji to swallow a few drops. The baby's breathing was shallow, his tiny chest rising and falling too quickly. Baba Tafa had seen death before. He knew the signs. And Olodimiji was slipping away. Desperate, he wrapped the baby and rushed out into the night. The village was dark and quiet, but he didn't care. He pounded on Mama F's door with all the strength he had left. The old midwife opened it, her eyes widening at the sight of the sweating, feverish child. Bring him in, she ordered. Baba Tafa obeyed, placing Olodimiji on a small mat. Mama F moved quickly, crushing leaves, mixing powders, muttering prayers. She pressed a damp cloth to Olodimiji's head, rubbed his tiny feet with ointment, and poured a warm, bitter liquid down his throat. Hours passed. Baba Tafa sat beside the baby, whispering to him, "You are a fighter, my son. You will survive. You must." The fever raged on, the baby's body burning hot. Baba Tafa prayed, not to the gods of the village, but to the unseen power he had never fully believed in. Don't take him from me. Not this one. Then, Just before dawn, Olodimiji let out a weak cry. It was the first real sound he had made all night. Mama F touched his forehead and smiled. The fever is breaking. Baba Tafa's vision blurred with tears. He reached out, his fingers shaking, and touched Olodimiji's tiny hand. It was warm. The battle was not over. But his son, had survived the first fight. And he would survive many more. The morning after Olodimiji's fever broke, Baba Tafa sat outside his hut, staring at the rising sun. He had not slept. His body ached from exhaustion, but his heart was light. The child had lived. Inside, Olodimiji lay on a small mat, wrapped in the softest cloth Baba Tafa owned. His breaths were even, his tiny fingers curled into loose fists. His skin, once pale and sickly, now had a warm glow. He was still weak, but he was alive. Baba Tafa let out a slow breath. He had never imagined that at this stage of his life, he would be a father again. And yet, fate had placed Olodimiji in his arms. I did not ask for you, little one, he murmured, staring at the child. But now that you are here, I will never abandon you. The village of Aponran was small, but its people had sharp tongues. By midday, the rumors had already spread. Baba Tafa has taken in an abandoned child. Where did the baby come from? Does he even have the strength to raise a child at his age? Some came to his hut out of curiosity. Others came with concern. Mama F visited, bringing herbs and warm broth. A joke came with fresh cloth and continued to nurse Olodimiji alongside her own son. But not everyone was kind. One afternoon, as Baba Tafa sat under the big mango tree in the village square, a man approached him. Old man, the man sneered. Why burden yourself with a child that is not yours? Baba Tafa looked up, his gaze steady. Because no child deserves to die unloved. The man scoffed. What if his mother abandoned him for a reason? What if he is cursed? Baba Tafa's jaw tightened. He had heard such talk before. Some villagers believed that abandoned children carried bad luck, that they were omens of misfortune. But Baba Tafa refused to believe that. If he is cursed, then I will bear his curse, he said simply. If he brings misfortune, let it come to me first. The man shook his head and walked away, but the whispers did not stop. Baba Tafa did not care. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Raising Olodimiji was not easy. Baba Tafa was a poor man. His farm was small, his strength was not what it used to be, and now he had another mouth to feed. Some days, he went hungry just to make sure Olodimiji had enough to eat. Some nights, he stayed awake, rocking the baby to sleep when sickness or teething made him restless. It was a life of sacrifice, but it was also a life of love. One evening, as the sun set over the village, Baba Tafa sat with Olodimiji in his lap. The boy was now strong, his cheeks full, his eyes bright. Listen to me, my son, Baba Tafa whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I may not have much to give you. No riches, no land, no great name. But I will give you everything I have, my love, my strength, my wisdom. Olodimiji gurgled, grabbing at Baba Tafa's beard. The old man chuckled. One day, you will be great, he continued. Not because of where you came from, but because of what is inside you. He looked up at the darkening sky and made a silent vow. I will raise you well. I will make sure you have the chance to become whatever destiny has written for you, even if it costs me everything. And with that, Baba Tafa sealed his promise. Baba Tafa had always believed that a man's greatest weapon was knowledge. He had seen strong men fall, warriors defeated, and wealthy men lose everything. But the wise always found a way to survive. Olodimiji was still a child, barely able to form full sentences, but Baba Tafa had already made up his mind. His son would not live in ignorance. Yet, there was a problem. In Aponran, education was a luxury. The village had only one school, and it was not free. The head teacher, Master Guide, required every child to come with books, slates, and a small fee for learning materials. Most villagers could not afford it. Only the children of traders and chiefs sat in the schoolhouse, while the rest worked on farms or learned a trade. Baba Tafa had no money, but he had a will. One morning, Baba Tafa wrapped Olodimiji in a cloth and set off for the schoolhouse. The building was small, with cracked walls and wooden benches arranged in rows. A few children sat outside, waiting for their lesson to begin. Master Jide, a tall man with sharp eyes and a thin mustache, stood at the entrance. When he saw Baba Tafa approaching, he frowned. Baba Tafa, to what do I owe this visit? The old man adjusted Olodimiji on his hip. I have come to ask for a favor, he said. I want my son to learn. Master Jide sighed. Baba, you know how it works. The school is not free. Baba Tafa nodded. He had expected this. I have no money, he admitted. But I can work. I will sweep the floors, fetch water, clear the land. Let me serve the school, and in return, let my son learn. Master Jide folded his arms, considering. The village knew Baba Tafa was an honest man, a hard worker despite his age. And Master Jide, though strict, was not a heartless man. After a long pause, he spoke. Very well. You will work for the school, and in return, your son will have a seat in the classroom. Baba Tafa bowed deeply. Thank you. May the gods bless you. As he turned to leave, Master Jide called after him. Bring him when he is ready. But know this, education is not just about sitting in a classroom. It is about sacrifice. Baba Tafa smiled. Sacrifice is something I know well. Days turned into weeks. Every morning before sunrise, Baba Tafa would arrive at the schoolhouse to sweep the floors, cut firewood for the teachers, and clean the compound. He worked with hands that ached and knees that threatened to give out, but he never complained. And then, when Olodimiji was old enough, Baba Tafa dressed him in a simple cloth and walked him to school. It was a strange sight. Other children had neat uniforms, polished slates, and shiny pencils. Olodimiji had none of these. But he had something greater, a father who believed in him. The first day was difficult. The other children whispered and laughed at him. Look at his torn clothes. His father is just a poor farmer. Olodimiji's fists clenched, shame burning in his chest. But when he looked up, he saw Baba Tafa standing at the school gate, watching him with proud eyes. Do not bow your head, my son, Baba Tafa had told him that morning. You are not less than anyone. Hold your head high, and learn like your life depends on it, because it does. And so, Olodimiji walked into the classroom, ignoring the whispers, ignoring the laughter. He would learn. He would rise. He would become more than the world expected. And he would make Baba Tafa proud. Olodimiji quickly realized that school was not just about learning, it was about survival. From the moment he entered the classroom, he was an outsider. The other children had parents who could afford books, ink, and proper uniforms. He had none of those things. Why is he even here? A boy named Sola sneered one morning. He's just a poor farmer's son. He will never be like us. Laughter filled the room. Olodimiji clenched his fists but said nothing. His father's words echoed in his mind. Do not bow your head, my son. So he didn't. Instead, he focused. While the other children played, he stayed behind, memorizing lessons. When they laughed at his torn clothes, he ignored them and practiced his handwriting on the sand outside. He did not have a slate, so he used a stick to write his sums in the dirt. And when Master Jide asked a question, Olodimiji's hand was always the first to rise. Baba Tafa was a poor man, but he made sure his son never missed a day of school. Even when they had nothing to eat, even when the rains were heavy and the road was muddy, Olodimiji went. But hunger was a cruel enemy. Some days, his stomach growled so loudly during lessons that the other children laughed. Other days, he felt so weak that his vision blurred. One afternoon, after an exhausting day of school and farm work, Olodimiji nearly collapsed on the road home. Baba Tafa caught him just in time. My son, the old man said gently, is the hunger too much? Olodimiji shook his head. I will be fine, Baba. Baba Tafa's heart ached. That night, he went out to the village square and spoke to Mama F, the kind woman who sold food. "Please," he begged, "let my son eat once a day. I will pay you with labor." Mama F looked at him for a long time before nodding. "Come early in the mornings. Sweep my shop, and the boy will eat." And so, Baba Tafa worked even harder. He swept floors before the sun rose. He cut firewood at night. He went to bed with an aching back and calloused hands. Also, his son would not study on an empty stomach. The months passed, and soon, the first major school examination arrived. Master Jide distributed the test papers, and the classroom fell silent. Oladimeji gripped his charcoal pencil, his heart pounding. He had studied every night by the dim light of Baba Tafa's lantern. He had practiced his sums in the sand. He had whispered historical dates to himself while fetching water. This was his chance. When the results were posted, the classroom erupted in shock. Oladimeji scored the highest. That poor boy. Even more than Sola. Master Jide smiled as he handed Oladimeji his paper. "You have proven that knowledge is not about wealth, but about effort," he said. For the first time, Oladimeji held his head high, his father's words ringing in his ears. He was no longer just a poor farmer's son. He was a boy with a future, and he refused to fail. Oladimeji's success in school filled Baba Tafa with pride, but it also brought unexpected problems. Not everyone was happy about the poor farmer's son excelling. Sola, the village chief's son, had always been the smartest in the class, until Oladimeji arrived. Now, Sola's father was furious. "How can a common farmer's child be better than my son?" he roared at Sola's mother. "This is a disgrace." Sola, desperate to win back his father's favor, made a decision that would change Oladimeji's life forever. It was a quiet night. Baba Tafa and Oladimeji had finished eating their simple meal of yam and palm oil. The old man sat outside, staring at the stars, while Oladimeji lay on his mat inside, dreaming of a bright future. Then, a sharp crack, a smell, smoke. Then came the shouts. "Fire! Fire!" Oladimeji bolted upright, coughing as thick smoke filled the small hut. He heard Baba Tafa outside, calling his name. The flames spread fast, licking the thatched roof like a hungry beast. The walls glowed orange, the heat unbearable. "Baba!" he screamed, stumbling towards the door. A strong hand grabbed him just as the roof collapsed. Baba Tafa pulled him out, shielding him as embers flew into the night. They stood there, watching everything they owned burn to the ground. By morning, nothing remained. The villagers gathered, whispering among themselves. Some felt sorry for Baba Tafa, but others sneered. "This is what happens when a man forgets his place," one elder muttered. "He should have accepted his fate instead of dreaming too big." Master Jide arrived, his face dark with anger. "This was no accident," he said. "Someone set this fire." But there was no proof, and no one would speak. Oladimeji turned to his father. "What will we do now, Baba?" The old man sighed, his eyes filled with sorrow, but not defeat. "We start again, my son." And so, with only the clothes on their backs, they walked toward an uncertain future. The fire had stolen everything, Baba Tafa's farm tools, their sleeping mats, their little clay pots, but it could not steal their will to survive. As the sun rose over Aponran, Baba Tafa and Oladimeji stood on the village outskirts, staring at the ashes of their former home. "Where will we go now, Baba?" Oladimeji asked, his voice small. The old man placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "A man is not truly homeless as long as he has his dignity. We will survive." But surviving would not be easy. They walked for hours, knocking on doors, seeking help. Some villagers shook their heads, others avoided their eyes. Finally, they reached Mama F's small food stall. The kind woman sighed when she saw them. "Baba Tafa, you are a good man," she said. "But I have no space for you here. However, you may sleep at the back of my shop for now." Grateful, Baba Tafa bowed deeply. That night, they lay on the bare ground, using their arms as pillows. The wind was cold, But Olodimiji refused to shiver. "I will not cry, Baba," he whispered. Baba Tafa smiled in the darkness. "Good. Because this is only the beginning of our story, not." Thank you for listening to this story. For more content like this, click the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you will be informed whenever a new story is published. Love from African stories, folktales, and jokes.